So our first vial is the ink, and our second vial, this is just water with a surfactant in it. Both of these have a surfactant, which is anything that lowers the surface tension of a liquid. In this one, it's actually just dish soap. And that means that it's going to have lower surface tension than the water in our tray so that the ink can float, so that we can develop some designs here. Now, our next treasure is our brushes. These are just little watercolor brushes. Yours are shiny and new, and they're probably really stiff with starch. So you can just take your cup of water and swish them through that to loosen them up, get that starch off so they're nice and pliant. I know I have a very large cup of water.
Show off.
And then our last treasure, our fourth treasure, is some paper. So some little pieces of washi, which is just Japanese for paper. And we will use the paper initially to make some little test prints. And then when you're ready, when you're confident, you can move over to printing on your Bisqueware coasters. Okay, so set the paper aside someplace safe as well. And now we can just go ahead and fill up our tray. I'm just gonna work in one side of my tray for now. As we're working, you might want to refresh the water with new. You can just hop over to the other side of your tray. We only need about 1/2 inch. That's about a fingernail's depth of water in the tray to begin.
And then I just want to say that there's also a little bag that came in your kit, and that bag can serve two purposes. It can be where you store your Suminagashi supplies, so you've got a little like art kit, or if you decide that you want to gift your coasters to somebody, because it can make a nice gift, you can use it as a gift bag. So it's like all ready for you. Okay, back to you, Natalie.
Thank you, Alyssa. Yeah. Okay, so now that we're ready to begin, almost, I just love it that Alyssa always starts us with those deep breaths, because the frame of mind that we want to foster within ourselves here is one of calmness, that's lovely, but also of collaboration. So what we're going to do here is create images in collaboration with the ink. We don't need to have any preconceived notion of how they're going to look, what they're going to be. They're just going to emerge in partnership with the ink. Your images don't need to look like mine nor anyone else's. In fact, they never will. We can never recreate the same image twice. So we're just going with the flow here, and try to enjoy not having to be in control of the process. So our first step is we've got our ink in our tray. I'm going to charge my brush. That means I'm just going to moisten it with the ink and then wipe off the excess. So it's saturated, but it's not dripping wet. And I'll do the same in my clear liquid with my other brush. As we go along, try not to switch your brushes. Keep one for each vial. And you can hold your brushes in either hand. And just kiss the tip of the ink brush to the surface of the water, and you will see the ink spreading off of it. Try not to dunk it underneath the surface, but the longer you hold it against just the surface of the water, the more ink you will see flowing from the tip of the brush. And then you can repeat with your clear brush in the same spot, and you will see a void open up. Any questions, any problems, concerns thus far?
Yeah, I have a question. I ran to get water. So did you pour water into that plastic dish?
Yes, I have about 1/2 inch of water in this dish, which is about
one dish or both dishes?
Just in one for now. And if I want to, if this gets muddy while I'm working, I can go ahead and add water to my other side as I'm working. And you all can do that as you feel you need to, because this might get murky as we're working.
How's everybody else? Is it expanding? Is it? Yes. Okay, that's excellent.
Okay, this is the foundation.
I have a question.
Maren, what's up?
So when I look at your ink and mine, I feel like mine is like really dark and not expanding as much. Is there like a reason for that?
It could be the amount of surfactant in the ink can vary. in the kits. And they also get a little bit of personality the farther they travel, which is a weird phenomenon. I wouldn't worry about it. Just try to work on creating concentric rings, sort of like this. They won't look exactly like this. And if it's a persistent problem and you can't get the ink to spread into rings, then I can give you instructions to add a little more surfactant to that ink so it spreads.
Also trying to just make sure that you're not dipping it too far below the surface. So just,
Okay.
it's a light little kiss on the top.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is the basic design, the starting point. You can recharge your brushes as you need to, but these rings, we're just going to continue building up rings. And already you probably can tell that yours don't look the same as mine. And that's because we are working with a very reactive fluid medium. So the water is just going to transmit into the design any vibrations, ambient air movements. Just the fact that I'm speaking to you, my air is the air is rustling over the surface of this and influencing the pattern. So certainly if you have a window open or a fan on, that is going to be visible in the pattern. And it also works with any vibrations. You know, if you were near a subway line, or if you have a heavy bass, a heavy bass line and something that you're listening to while you're doing this, that can also be translated into the design.
Is it working for you now, Maren? All right.
Oh, great. Okay, so I love to try to find, sort of like cloud watching, try to find some images that are suggested in the tray. So for instance, here, this really looks to me like a topographical map of a volcano cone with this like void in the middle. Does anybody see any forms suggested in their tray? Yeah, with graceful confidence. So just sort of,
What exact kind of confidence am I supposed to be using?
it's a graceful one. It's
Graceful confidence.
yeah. So you just want to, not with haste, but just sort of roll it down onto the surface. We want to try not to jostle the pattern as we're making the transfer, is the idea here. And if possible, not capture any air bubbles. It's taking the print is actually the hardest part about this. And
this craft can be done without printing. So as you're kind of developing kind of the muscle memory of applying this ink and negative space to the thing, think about it as kind of like something that you could do meditatively, right? It's not always about making the mark, but making the mark is fun too.
Right, to make the permanent print, we can just dabble in our tray without even worrying about making a print if we choose to. And I do know some people who practice Suminagashi as meditation without printmaking. We can also use our clear negative space, I like to call it, as sort of a force field to push the shapes around. And you can see I like to hold my brushes in one hand, sort of like chopsticks. You just do whatever is comfortable for yourself. So this is starting to get really juicy. Nice. Okay. So I'm going to introduce you to a few different techniques, 5 different techniques for manipulating the pattern. So we started off with number 1, which is just our basic concentric rings. And you can follow along with me and make examples of these different techniques, or just pursue your own vision. Totally fine either way. There's not going to be a quiz at the end. So our second technique requires a special tool, which is a hair. So I'm going to run my fingers through my hair and find one. If you don't have a hair to spare, you can just use the end of your paintbrush. So the dry end of your paintbrush will act as a stylus. But a hair is really the perfect thing here because, I know you can't even see it, it's so fine, and it's going to make a long and a sinuous line that we can't quite control. A lot of the aesthetics underpinning and the ethics sort of underpinning this craft are about giving up control. releasing the artist from that hubristic urge to control the design. We want to let something interesting happen. A stylus is a little bit too controlled. A hair, it introduces some uncertainty. So as I just let it drift around the tray, it's not really doing anything that I can quite plan, right? And what I get is something that I would never plan. If I allow myself to give up control, something really, really interesting might happen that I never would have done of my own volition. So either using the hair or your brush as a stylus, you can work through the pattern. And again, it's going to keep morphing and moving and swirling. There are so many external inputs that act on this design. I just jostled my table, for instance. Also, the ambient temperature and humidity really affect the way the ink moves. So from one day to the next, this can give you different expressions. And
we had a tornado warning here in New York not too long ago when we were doing this session, and Natalie and I's tray were, it's like, it was so different, and the prints were like electrified. It was so strange, right, Natalie?
It was so bizarre.
It was really weird.
Before or since had images like that day when we had some crazy barometric pressure or something. So I'm going to show you now how to take a print onto your coaster, which you can do when you're ready. Keep working on the paper as long as you want. But our coasters have 2 identical sides. So of our 4 coasters, we get 8 chances to make an image. So again, we want to be sort of swift, but not hasty here. And just try to roll it down quickly, but without getting an air bubble.
And then hold, because it needs a couple of seconds to
that
saturate.
Was a really good transfer on my part. I think I was too hasty. Don't worry though, because I get to make another image on the other side.
And another thing to keep in mind about the coaster printing, because it's a solid substrate, the water is displaced. So it's never going to be an exact replica of what you saw in the tray right before you printed it. So my advice is to not judge it right now and look at it with fresh eyes tomorrow to decide which side you want to put the cork sticker on. Or if you want to take a second double exposure, like on Natalie's one that she just did, she might want to print something maybe it's a little bit more opaque on top of it just to see what happens, because Why not? If you don't like it, just like roll the dice and see if a double print makes it more awesome.
Exactly. So I do have the opportunity to print on the other side. I can also make a double print if I want to on top of this, but I have to wait until it's dry. That's an important point. So it doesn't take very long to dry. I'm going to just switch over to the other side of my tray so that you all at home can see clearly what I'm doing.
Anybody tried the sake yet?
Is it good?
Apparently there's some like nice honeysuckle notes to it for those who like. And what's great about this is that you don't have to, like if you're not a drinker, if you don't like to drink, or if your employees don't drink, it's great because we're using it as an art material, right? So it's like good for both, right? It's not about the sake. The sake actually gets to be informed as part of the artistic process. But I find that it's a lovely one that can be, mainly we send this one because it's in a can, so it's not going to break, and it's delicious room temperature, which some sakes are not. So anybody like this one? Is it hitting the spot? All right, Danielle. Awesome. Okay, back to you, Natalie.
Thank you. I wish I had some of that sake.
I'll have to send you some.
You're really selling the honeysuckle notes. So we will come to the sake as our 5th style of pattern manipulation. But right now, I'm just building up another design on some fresh water. And this time, to move it around, I am going to use my breath. So instead of the stylus, I'm going to actually use a directional breath, getting my head right down close to the surface of the water and pushing it with my breath. And it has a pretty, like a psychedelic aspect to this one. So again, I'm setting it in motion, but I can't control it.
Okay, so I ran and got some more water, so I see that you're now filling your other dish to do like another round, I guess.
Yeah, just because this is murky, I want you all to be able to see what I'm doing.
Right.
And you can do the same when you get,
You're saying we could have another shot
yeah.
at the title.
It's not a competition, sir.
I know, I was
Duel, dueling sides of the tray, you know? I mean, that could be kind of fun.
just to let you know, that was a joke.
So I have got some images that I love, and I have some images that maybe I don't love. What happened here? I have no idea. So I'm going to go ahead and try and take a double print on this coaster, which is dry, and maybe make something interesting. Ugh, the pressure is killing me. Is that interesting? We'll see.
I think so. Can you put that back on there for a second? What?
Okay, so one of the things that I like to meditate on that this working in the Suminagashi tray brings up to me is, of course, the lack of control as an artist, or anybody who may be an artist or maybe doesn't feel creative at all. There is this moment of stepping up to a blank page and wondering, okay, what do I do now? And that's something that we can feel in lots of different points in our lives. When we have this really self-centered approach that we need to have all of the answers, it closes us off to the serendipity and to solutions that might be at our fingertips if we just open our mindset to them. So this style of working encourages that collaboration with the ink. It means that I don't have to know all the answers. I have to be open to reacting. So I'm not in control of the outcome. I'm only in control of my reactions, as Alyssa says. And this can be a really fruitful mindset for problem solving and creativity. And just meditating here in the tray helps me access that style of thinking. It's described as the difference between the approach in a Western tradition of art making is like seeing a mountain, getting a concept and hiking up it and planting a flag on it. You have a concept and you execute it. But in the Eastern style of art making, it's so often much more about getting in a boat and seeing where the tides take you. And we're literally floating around here, letting the water swirl about to see what happens. And yes, I'm controlling it to some extent, but never completely. So here I've built up another situation. I do like using this clear liquid as this force around the edges to create a composition. And again, I'm going to shape this with my breath, but I'm just going to give one strong buffeting breath straight from above this time. So fill your lungs for this one.
Yeah, and eyes up. Watch this happening. This is gonna see the big bang happening right now.
So this style, hang on, you gotta catch my breath. This style really, it almost electrifies the pattern. It goes haywire. It's one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah, and kind of harkening back to what Natalie was talking about. So this kind of concept of only controlling our reactions to things. This is my favorite time to pull out my Suminagashi kit, is when I'm kind of between a rock and a hard place of like, I'm having a day where like nothing's going well. It's kind of like today, actually. I've been having one of those days. And so this is very lovely to be in this space with you doing this, because it's a nice reset button of like, okay, there's not much we can control in life in general, but I can control my reaction to things. It helps me like shift my lens and just kind of appreciate, the moment where I might not have been so appreciative, a moment before. So hot tip, it's a nice toolbox, to have, to lean on if you find yourself frustrated. Back to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Alyssa. So I want to, while we're working, I'm just going to, chatter away with some concepts about this craft for you to meditate on. And one of them is wabi sabi, which is a term that, of course, is impossible to translate. So I'll do like a really ham-fisted version. It's an aesthetic concept in Japan, which is essentially the beauty of the imperfect. And it's really, it's almost a little bit cliched in Japan, but it's kind of a powerful concept because it's a dual emotion. And it's something that's personal. You could get it looking at a famous work of art, or like a utilitarian household object. Your grandmother's tea towel could evoke this as much as a painting in a museum. And the example I like to give is looking out at a landscape, a beautiful early autumn landscape, for instance, in which we might feel a sense of beauty and a gratitude for that sensitivity to beauty around us. But paired with that is the awareness that the light is changing and that vision is passing. In fact, that all things are fleeting in life and all things pass away. So it's pretty heavy, right? It's this poignant duality of beauty and the passage of time. So the way that I see that, referenced through Suminagashi is, of course, that each of these images is a snapshot. It can never be made the same way twice because it's so reactive to all of these forces, these elemental forces and vibrations through the water. So, each one of these is, it's like a little moment of my life. It also looks like a moment of the natural world being expressed here. And when you look at historical Suminagashi, that is a moment that is an artisan reaching to you through, almost 1,000 years of time in another place and time that we can't even barely imagine and conjure up, which is kind of groovy.
Magic. That's magic right there. Okay, she's breathing from the side this time.
So I find that I think on the coasters, like the heavier lines transmit a little bit better than the really fine lines. So I'm trying to keep this kind of chunky over here.
Anybody taken the plunge with the coasters yet?
Okay, so I think it's time for me to open my sake. I mean, it's already opened. We've used this many times, but I'm going to, and you can do the same, use the lid of the sake as an extra little dish here. So into this dish, I'm going to put a dash of my ink, just a tiny dash.
Yeah, you don't want to use a lot of this because it's a limited resource that you have here. And this Suminagashi kit can last you for years, so because you see how much we're using, just a little dab will do you every time.
Yeah. Okay, and now I'm going to pour in some of my sake. So I want about equal parts, and it's something about equal parts ink to sake, and it's something that we might have to zhuzh it when we test it. And by the way, if you can't spare a sip of your sake, this works with any rubbing alcohol or grain alcohol, like vodka, gin, whatever. Those will work as well.
Yeah, so you can use this as a party trick next time you have folks over, and you can just splash whatever you're drinking into the dish.
So I'm going to just start with a tiny touch of my regular ink. And this is just so I can see what's going on. I know it's really faint. What I need to do is build up a sort of a force field here with several touches of my clear liquid. So you can see now I'm understanding how far my force field is extending. The key with this sake, which we call the fifth form, I don't know, for some reason we started calling it that, is that we're only going to touch the brush once. So we need it to be constrained by this clear force field. And this is the first chemical intercession that we're making. So far, we've been pushing things around physically, but now this is going to cause the surface tension of the ink to behave totally differently because the alcohol's in it. So I'll charge my
I want to hop in here real quick, Natalie. So, really important. Once you put your brush in the sake ink mixture, do not put that brush back into the black ink bottle unless you wash it, or you're going to taint your whole ink bottle with this chemical reaction, and then it'll just be a kind of a different type of thing.
Yeah, good point. Okay, so I've charged my little sake brush, and you want to hold it to the surface for a second. And it makes a puff of smoke or a little sea dragon. You can see that it is just completely different from the way the ink has been moving.
Isn't that wild?
I always want to just keep putting more.
More water dragons. More water dragons.
So beautiful.
And it's going to be hard to get this to transfer onto the coasters because it is so fine. So I might suggest that this one should go on paper, but you know, you can chance it if you want. Yeah, really. Oh, so like reminiscent.
Nice.
Art Nouveau, as someone said earlier, these little swirls. This is like capturing an eddy, you know, in an illustration of fluid dynamics. And so using this sake mixture, this sort of thing would traditionally be printed next to poetry as an illustration of the poetry. So you have a beautiful little trifecta between the poet, the calligrapher, and the marbler working together. And this whole craft is something that was not commonplace. Nowadays, it's much more widespread, but historically, only two or three marblers ever practiced this at a time because they were patronized only by the imperial court. So it was a really rarefied decorative art for architectural screens, for fans, for ladies to carry, and books, illustrations in books of poetry. And yes, you have now all entered that illustrious lineage of marblers.
Yes. We inducted more marblers.
Now, one of the other things about this craft that is delightful, obviously I already enjoy it, hopefully you do too, is that just the way all of these external forces act on the water can also remind us that we are, you know, we're natural creatures too, and we're mostly made of water. So we have these porous little corporeal shells that we go through the world in, and the water in our bodies is also acted on by the forces outside of us. And sometimes those forces are really just completely out of our control. So it really is a centering process to be reminded of that. The reason why marbling gets its name is because it looks like slabs of marble. So when you come back to these tomorrow, they will probably look to you, I mean, they do to me, really quite naturalistic, like pieces of stone. And when you make that decision about which side is going to win the front side award, it's really, I'm having a hard time deciding actually. It's so easy. You just peel the backing off of this giant sticker, and it has a little bit of it's a little bit undersized so that you have a margin of about 1/8 of an inch. Just center it and presto. And this is totally permanent. Once it's dry, it won't bleed. It makes actually a really, really great coaster.